So here we are already in chapter 6, and I really find it exciting to kind of get into this area now because what you'll notice after reading this chapter is that we are now really talking about Rome, not just in its legacy, but then now its legacy directly on the West. And I want to kind of really emphasize some aspects about this in a way that's stronger even than the text talks about, especially once we get to talking about Rome and the provinces and their neighbors, because when we're talking about the neighbors of Rome, we're talking about the Western world, which is going to become Europe, which is what is going to lead to colonization of the Americas, and here we are in the United States of America, and how this all comes together to where we really get what we call Western culture. And from then on, we're going to then go into the Christianity in the Roman Empire, and then just every chapter, everything becomes clearer and clearer, and we see all of these connections. And so, anyhow, I look forward to being able to go through that as we keep going on. Now, as usual, I'm going to skip over certain things, and I'm going to add certain things that are not talked about in the textbook. Okay, so I'm not going to go into great detail about all of the dynasties that are talked about in here. I think that the textbook helps you out with that. And I would rather you just conceptualize to drive in the point instead of you having, needing to memorize these different dynasties. To be aware that we saw that shift from the Republic of Rome into an imperial power, and then the rise of dynasties, right? Coming into being, and in the Roman world. And so we look at significantly Julius Caesar's heir, Octavian, who is going to take out the chaos that was happening and bring order and normal life to the so-called Republic. And then he is going to take a Roman version of a Hellenistic monarchy into the Roman political world. And so this is something that's significant about this time period that you want to realize. What's also interesting is the way, if you notice in the chapter, that Octavian attempted to be an authoritarian in power, but aesthetically, or to dress himself up and to posture as one of the people, as opposed to the guy who is the ultimate authority over all the people. And he basically tried to make it look as if he was just merely, the first citizen. And I think it's kind of interesting too, because if you look at even Gaddafi in Libya, that was overthrown recently, who ruled for years in Libya, he created a system there called Jamhuriya in Arabic, based off Jumhuriya, which is the word for republic, but he used the word like peoples, like basically like a people's state, in which he claimed that the people had direct rule. And even when the Civil War started happening, you could see him pronounce on TV, "I have no position to step down from. This is the people's government." In other words, even though he was the total ruler in power of Libya, he tried to portray it as if he was merely some sort of symbol that kind of facilitated the rule by the people, but in reality, he was ruling it with an iron fist. And in a sense, this is kind of the portrayal that we get of what Octavian was doing with Rome. Now, he then also was showered with honors and titles, and one was Augustus. And of course, that's what, as the book says, that he would then really be referred to as, which meant revered. and he took on this godlike quality. And that's another thing that's we're going to see rise within this time period, is the kind of divinity situation of the placement of these Caesars, especially after death, if not mainly after death, but to create a kind of Caesar worship on top of this. We even looked on page 173, where the term "son of a god" comes from many of these Caesars. And it's kind of interesting. I think many of you right away are seeing some of the language and the art and the flavor for how the emperors are going to portray themselves don't look so different from what we see even when Rome becomes Christian. And in fact, as we go into Christianity and into the rise of Christianity in the Roman world, we really do see that Roman Catholicism looks and feels very Roman, right? And we'll get to that more later, but I'm just kind of reminding us of that aspect to this, okay? So that's mainly what I wanted to address there. If there's any questions more about the details of the dynasties and what they're about, please feel free to ask me a question on that. So I'm going to move here to the map. And again, we always love maps, right? And this helps us break down how Rome looked at its greatest extent. And we can see, we had the Parthian Empire over here to the right. And remember, that's a fusion of Hellenistic culture with the Persian, and that's very interesting as well. So we still have that now we have like a kind of Greco-Persian legacy over here, and there was even a time of Roman rule here in what we now call the Middle East, and we go all the way up into Britain, into Hadrian's Wall that sits off, and Caledonia is going to be with Scotland, right? And here we have the Irish, Hibernia is Ireland. So we have them reaching from all the way out here to Germania is going to be very significant. We're going to talk a lot about that in a little bit. And then here is Africa and Egypt. And we'll kind of go into a little bit later a discussion about the way that they conceptualized Africa. It's a little bit different than what Europeans are going to think about later, okay? But here we have the ethnic makeup of majority of people out here is complex. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about more and kind of repeat is that we don't have a lot of records about the cultures of all of these people that are going to be called barbarians out here, but we're going to have a lot of Roman writers talking about what they think of these people out here, and realizing that we can't ignore those sources because that's pretty much what we have. And at the same time, they're writing from a very biased point of view, and from an imperial point of view. So are those things actually true or not? What we essentially are having is Celtic peoples, right? In this section here, Gaul and the British Isles. And we have the Germanic peoples, and then we have Slavic peoples. And essentially, I was reading a book on the history of the so-called barbarian peoples. And essentially, it's very hard to distinguish at times between Celts, Germanic peoples, and Slavs, and those tribal groups that are going to exist on the periphery of the Roman Empire. What's significant and why I'm going to keep bringing them up and I want to draw more attention to than even the book does is that these are Europeans. These are the ancestors of Europeans, not Romans, but it's the Romanization that is going to create modern Europe, and that these so-called barbarians are going to take on this Romanization and we're going to see a rise of kingdoms and nation states in this part of the world that's influenced by Italy, right? Okay, by Rome. So, having said that, I'm going to stop here and move on to the next lecture.